Hi, it was wonderful spending time with the Women's Commission this morning and getting to meet you all and to explore a little bit about mindfulness practices, and relaxation techniques. And so I thought I would put together a short video to recap some of the big picture items that we explored, to offer some information that will help round out and maybe explain some things with a little bit more clarity, and then to point you in the direction of a couple of resources, some that I showed you when we met as a reminder, and others that you might want to follow up on. Alrighty, first of all, big picture, we really looked at two things: mindfulness practices and a relaxation technique. And there are many mindfulness practices, a good number, and there are a very large number of relaxation techniques. And to help provide a little bit of clarity around things that can be confusing, we use the breath as the object of attention for our mindfulness practice. And we use the breath as something that we manipulated by slowing down for the relaxation technique. Now, at one point I said, in response to one of your questions, well, let's talk about what mindfulness is, because oftentimes mindfulness can be confused with the various things that one can do to help cultivate more mindfulness. And so I shared with you things like being patient and kind and compassionate and not so reactive and less judgmental and a little bit more focused, and the list of attributes: grateful, curious, aware. These are all things that when we say mindfulness, we're referring to. And these are qualities that we all possess. You don't have to learn a mindfulness practice or anything in particular to have those qualities, which is really what it is to fundamentally be a human being, and in some ways to be at ease in the world. Things that we can develop and cultivate more of, because with the busyness of our lives and all the things that are going on and other people and the way they will respond to things, it's easy to get caught up and to lose touch with that larger aspect of our mindful presence, openness, receptivity, all the many, many different types of words we might use to describe what it is to be mindful, or to have our mindfulness aspect be strong moment by moment. Now, there are many, many ways of cultivating those qualities, and one of them is through mindfulness practices. So there's a variety of mindfulness practices. The most popular that I share are called focused attention, body scan, open monitoring, and connection or loving kindness. And we did one of those when we were together, the first one called the focused attention practice. And on the app that I shared with you all, and some of you have followed up to get the access code, I hope that you find it useful. You will find on that app those four primary practices, and 6-minute, 9-minute, no, what am I saying? 6-minute, 12-minute, and 18-minute versions, so that you could pick how long you'd like to practice. Now, one thing that I didn't share with you is some research that finds that the mind wanders about 47% of the time. That is, when they've done these very big studies and they've sort of dropped in on people in the middle of the day and asked or inquired whether their mind was wandering or they were on task, about 47% of the time, so let's just say, to keep it simple, about half the time our mind is wandering. And often we're not aware that it's wandering. Now, I didn't cite you that statistic or refer to that piece of research that was published in about 2010 by Matt Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert, but we certainly talked about the phenomenon, and we talked about it generally, and we were, many of us, able to relate to it based on our own experience. Interestingly, I think, and important to reflect on, when that research was published, it was titled, "A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind," because in addition to finding out at random moments of the day whether people were on task or off task, they also inquired, what's your mood? What's your well-being like? And when people were off task, their mood was lowered, and it prompted this, interesting and probably not unfamiliar to you recognition that when our mind is wandering, and again, we talked about this when we were together, caught up in the future, worrying about things, hung up on the past and regretting things, etc., our mood tends to drop. And if we're not aware that it's bouncing around in this way, and it bounces around about 47% of the time, then all the more, with consequences that can really affect our focus and our clarity and, well, all those qualities that we speak to when we speak to what it is to be mindfully aware. Patient, less reactive, less judgmental, focused, attentive, etc. So we practice a mindfulness exercise like the focused attention practice that we did toward the end of our time together when we focused our attention on the sensations of the breath, or maybe you chose a sound or the sensations of your hands, some object, a relatively neutral object. You could, as was nicely commented on, it could be some very sort of maybe music without words and things to get us thinking too much. And we can just focus on the music. And when we notice our mind wandering, which we will sooner or later, we bring our attention back to the object. That's that very basic, very popular, and very useful mindfulness practice known as focused attention. And when we did it together, I suggested that unless you were uncomfortable focusing on the breath, and sometimes it can be uncomfortable for some of us, to pick another object, but we focused on the breath. Okay. You have in the app, and there's many, many mindfulness practice opportunities out there in the world, many, many apps and many, guided practices on websites, etc. You will more often than not be prompted or invited to focus on an object like the breath, and when you notice your mind wandering, bringing your attention back to the breath. And this is the training of our attention. With my colleague Mishi Jha, who I spoke about, we've done a lot of work with mindfulness in the military. And one of the generals that we've worked with for a very long time, he refers to mindfulness practices as push-ups for the mind, push-ups for the mind. So a reminder that when we do a mindfulness practice, we are exercising our attention. We're training our attention. And we recognize that our mind will wander. The research makes that abundantly clear. You don't need research. You do your own research all the time, with you being your own subject. And we know that our mind wanders often. The part we may not realize is just how often we're not aware that our mind is wandering and the effect it can take on us, which is why doing a mindfulness practice on a regular basis to train our attention to be more skilled at noticing mind wandering so that we notice it sooner and we're able to then do what we choose with our attention, like coming back to the thing we're reading or the person that we're talking to, or even the thing we were thinking about before our attention got, interestingly hijacked. Now, we also learned, and we started, in fact, with a relaxation technique, which involves slowing down the breath. And there are many, many relaxation techniques out there, and we drew upon the breath because it's very accessible. It's always here, as long as we're here. And it reliably will help us soothe ourselves, to self-regulate our emotional, reactivity. It's not always going to happen, but in my experience and in the experience of a great many people, you can pretty much rely on taking a series of slower, deeper breaths and feeling more relaxed. If we were to put some, devices to measure various things like our heart rate or blood pressure, we'd find that heart rate goes down and blood pressure decreases when we slow down the breath. And we did that just for, 3 or 4 slower, deeper breaths. And there can be a noticeable effect there. And that can be very accessible, very doable throughout the day. I don't know, it takes 15 seconds, 20 seconds, if that. Even one slower, deeper breath. In fact, why not take one now with me? It really can be a game changer. And the more fully you're there for that breath you're taking, the more mindfully aware you are of the relaxing breath you're taking, mindfulness and relaxation come together in some ways. And the relaxation piece can be even more pronounced. And if you should do that, not for 3 breaths, but for 3 minutes of just slowing down the breathing in and out. And there's guided practices to sort of keep you remembering to do so with a good, easygoing pace. You'll find, I think, that I'm confident that if that kind of practice resonates with you, you'll find that it can be very, very relaxing. And nicely, you can do it for all of 1 breath or 3 breaths, and you could do it for 3 or 5 minutes. The book, The Healing Power of the Breath, draws upon practices that involve slowing down the breath, and what they write about is the many kinds of benefits and the reasons why we might find those to ultimately not be surprising. Okay, so we learned some relaxation, a relaxation technique that involves slowing down the breath, and we learned a mindfulness practice that involved focusing on the breath, slowing down the breath to relax, focusing on the breath to be able to steady our attention and notice mind wandering, slowing down the breath to relax, focusing on the breath to see things more clearly, including, not the least of which, the activity of our own mind. Okay, so I hope that's a helpful recap. And with that little bit of research that I dropped in just now, that the mind wanders, research finds on the typical person on the typical day, everyone's different, about 47% of the time, hopefully that speaks to just how beneficial it might be. Even if we could diminish that a little bit, that could be a huge gain. But even more importantly, we don't practice to have less activity of the mind. That may benefit. We don't practice focus, attention, mindfulness practice to feel more relaxed. That may also come about. We practice so that we can notice when our mind wanders, and when it does, bring our attention back to where we choose for it to be. Alrighty, now, a couple of additional things. On the SoBe Mindful app, for those of you who sought the access code, I also have a series of relaxation practices on there that involve the breath, because there's different ways of slowing down the breath, and different people like different kinds of practices. There's what's known as what I call line breathing. That's the kind of slowing down the in-breath and slowing down the out-breath. There's what I call triangle breathing, which is where you sort of inhale and then you hold the breath and then you exhale the breath, or some variation. Oftentimes for the same length, but sometimes it could be different practices, different lengths, like you might inhale to the count of 4 and hold to the count of 7, exhale to the count of 8. That's a popular triangle type practice. And then box breathing, where you inhale and hold and exhale and hold. And we didn't get into all that because the whole time we were together, we would have just been practicing those. And some of you would have found them very useful, and some of you may not have found them useful. And even if you found one useful, you may not have found the other so useful. So I shared this with you so that you can maybe, if you're interested, find the relaxation practice with the breath that resonates with you. Give them a try. There are so many books out there, in addition to books like The Healing Power of the Breath. There's a book called The Art of Breathing. There's a book called The Breathing Cure. There's a book that came out recently, a nice bestseller, well-written book called Breath. And they're all sort of pointing in the same direction around how it is that the breath is very powerful. And when we draw upon it skillfully and we slow it down, in particular, it can help bring about a more relaxed state. And there's many, many wisdom traditions that will draw upon the breath in other ways to become more focused and make it a more active breathing process. But I shared with you, and we practiced together, the most basic of them all, and in many ways as powerful as any of them can get, of the slowing down the in-breath and slowing down the out-breath. And I encourage you to practice that. When you wake up in the morning, before you get out of bed, take a few slower, deeper breaths. At night, before you go to bed, take a few slower, deeper breaths. When you get in your car or on the bus or on your bicycle and you're getting ready to go somewhere, take a few slower, deeper breaths. When you get to a stop sign and you come to a stop, which is what we're supposed to do at a stop sign, practice the practice I shared with you at the very end called stop, where we S, stop, or sit, or stand. T, take a breath. aware of the breath we're taking. O, observe. And that can be observing the breath or observing the activity of your mind or observing what's taking place around you. And then to proceed. And that can be all of a one breath or two breath practice called stop. It's a very short mindfulness practice in a way. And if you slow down the breath, which isn't required to take that breath, aware of the breath, but if you slow down the breath, then you're bringing a bit of relaxation into it as well. So you can use the app to also try out the line breathing, try out triangle breathing, try out box breathing, or you could get on the internet and just read about box breathing and other breathing practices, or send me an email and I'm happy to send you some links. The New York Times had a nice piece a couple of years ago where they talked about different breathing practices, and you won't have any difficulty finding lots and lots of resources. Most importantly, though, whether you're doing a mindfulness practice, one on the app or another one that you come across, or whether you're doing a relaxation practice involving the breath, always make sure you stay within what we could call the zone of comfort or the window of tolerance where it's comfortable enough. As I indicated when we were together, a lot of times when we move away from the relaxation practice and we move into the mindfulness practice, and again, there's 4 primary practices: focused attention, body scan, open monitoring, connection, also known as loving kindness. The app has all of those, so you could try different ones. They're different. They have different flavors, and they serve slightly different purposes, we could say, but all pointing in the direction of being more mindfully aware that oftentimes when we tone down the external chatter, when we're away from people and we don't have our cell phone on and we don't have our email going and we don't have a podcast going and we're not, looking at something on our phone, some game, and even if we don't have music going and we're just listening to guidance to focus on the breath, or you're just sitting there and you're guiding yourself, we then all of a sudden become much more aware of the busy mind that is happening all day long, but we're so caught up and distracted and focused on all these other things going on that we don't really notice it so much. And in many ways, as we talked about, it can nonetheless influence us. It can influence how we feel. It can influence our decision making, how we treat ourselves, how we treat others. And we're not even aware of the ways that that's happening. So here we're saying, well, let me find a little time. Let me take a little time to be more aware of me. And me is really a bunch of thoughts, feelings, and sensations that are continuously changing. And so you may find sometimes that when you actually clear away all that other stimulation and it's just you, that you almost don't know what to do with yourself. Pascal, the philosopher and mathematician, said something like, all of our problems are caused by our inability to sit quietly in a room by ourselves. And when we practice mindfulness, in some ways, and he wasn't talking about practicing mindfulness, but he was talking about the fact that when we just sort of are there with ourselves and there's not a lot of stimulation going on, we don't know what to do with ourselves. And we're not necessarily seeing clearly and, perceiving as directly as we could the kinds of thoughts, feelings, and sensations that we're having that can lead us to do and say things that aren't always so helpful to ourselves or to others for that matter. I don't think Pascal was saying we have to sit quietly in a room by ourselves. And by the way, there's a lot of ways of practicing mindfulness. There's mindful walking. There's a movement practice called the SoBe Mindful Movement practice. If you're interested, I can send you a link of me, guiding it here on our campus because it's a nice thing to do outside. There's mindful listening when you're talking to somebody or they're talking to you. So, one doesn't need to be in a room by themselves to be practicing mindfulness. To the contrary. But that is the most typical and in some ways perhaps useful ways of practicing mindfulness. And I don't think Pascal was saying you have to be in a room by yourself sitting quietly. I think what he was saying is that we really can't. It's not so easy. So when we do practice mindfulness, we are in many ways training ourselves to not need so much stimulation, to be able to not be so affected by every thought and feeling we have. Thoughts are not facts, but we sometimes forget that. And we are learning through the mindfulness practice to just be present for the coming and going of thoughts and feelings, like clouds passing across the sky. To be able to pick and choose the things that are important to attend to, and to not get caught up in the things that may not be. And one of the reasons we practice is so that we can become better at discerning the difference between the two. Because when we're feeling agitated and anxious, or frustrated, or we're in a big hurry, it's hard to tell the difference between what's really important and what matters, and what's just a momentary thing that if we just could turn our attention away from it for a little bit and back on something that really matters, it wouldn't matter so much a few moments later. So I hope for those of you who are interested in the app, or if you have your own apps or ways of practicing mindfulness, that you find that doing a little bit on a regular basis can go a long way towards seeing things more clearly. And when we see things more clearly, we're less likely to have preconceptions and assumptions and biases, and all these things get in the way. And often when we are feeling agitated and overwhelmed, it's because we're not seeing things so clearly. So we practice mindfulness on a regular basis for those of us who choose to, not so that we can feel better in the moment, but so that we can train our attention and train our ability to notice and be more aware of where our mind is moment by moment, and be more skillful at directing it where we choose, so that we can see things more clearly, more often, a little bit more clearly, a little bit more often than we might otherwise. And in so doing, save ourselves a lot of grief because of the places we don't get caught up, and we don't lose ourselves in worrying about future events and caught up in past events that really are never going to happen, or never going to happen the way that we imagine. And the way we're interpreting what took place, we're really making it into so much more than it is. And then we, of course, have the relaxation practices, so that in the moment when we're feeling agitated, rather than say, oh, I need to find a mindfulness practice and somehow go somewhere for 12 minutes to practice, no, that may not be so practical. We're practicing mindfulness for these moments. But when the moment becomes a little bit more than we can comfortably navigate, it's really helpful to have a relaxation practice in our toolkit that we can draw upon. And the relaxation practices, or what I like to call settling techniques that we can have in our toolkit to draw upon, can also be like the one that we talked briefly about, where we sort of say to ourselves, we'll see. So that, as was nicely pointed out, in anticipation of the holidays and getting together with family, we can sometimes be fretting or anticipating some interactions that cause us a little bit of angst. And when we realize that we're feeling that way in advance of what may or may not happen, we can take a breath and we could say, we'll see. And it's a reminder that we don't know, and we'll find out when we get there. And you've made it this far, so you're likely to make it through and maybe even learn and grow and find beneficial aspects of the times that we spend with people who oftentimes are very, very important to us. And we can miss opportunities and not savor the times that we are together. So I hope that this recap has been helpful. The book or two that I wanted to share with you that you might be interested in. One is known as, where is it? Real Happiness. It came out a handful of years ago. It's a book by Sharon Salzberg, and she goes through, and it's sort of like I think 28-day little program where each day you sort of, or for a period of time you practice different exercises. So if you'd like to do a little reading by a teacher who's a really well-regarded teacher, you might find Real Happiness to be a good book. And another one that is really a book that I really like a lot. It's not a basic book. So if you want a foundation basic book on mindfulness, then something like Real Happiness is a good one. There's a lot of them out there. But if you like art, I found this book when it came out, Looking at Mindfulness, to be a really wonderful book. And I would recommend that to anyone, especially if you are a fan of artwork, the visual arts in this case. Alrighty, you had the landscape of the mind. It's just a reminder to keep it handy if you'd like. And then when you find yourself feeling a little out of sorts, you can look at it and go, where am I? And just by identifying where you are can be a game changer. There's the various science findings on the back, and the very first one, putting feelings into words produces therapeutic effects in the brain, published in Psychological Science in 2007 by a wonderful researcher, Matt Lieberman, over at UCLA. And it is just that. When you can identify, oh, this is anger, this is fear, it changes aspects of the activity of our brain, and with it, our physiological arousal. I said it when we met, name it and tame it. And so in many ways, this is offering you an opportunity when you find yourself feeling a little agitated to find where you are. In doing so, wake up a little bit out of the agitated state, have a little bit more awareness, and take a breath. Bringing together, again, being aware, mindful, and relaxing, attending to the breath as an example, a slower, deeper breath to relax. Alrighty. I, once again, very much enjoyed spending time with you all. It's so wonderful to get to know you all a little better. And I'm so grateful for all that you do on our campus and with our students, and in support of each other. And I look forward to our paths crossing down the road, perhaps. All right. Be well, and wishing you all the best for the holidays.